Thank you all. Call the meeting of Board of Public Works and Safety to order at 5:30 p.m. for August 21, 2023. Roll call, please, Amanda.
Mr. Colvin?
Here.
Mr. Hoover?
Here.
Mr. Rutherford?
Here.
Thank you.
Minutes of our last meeting of August 7, 2023 have been disseminated to members of the board. Any corrections, additions, or deletions from staff? Hearing none, is there a motion for approval as presented?
So moved. Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. First on our agenda is Rick Bartlett for 1235 Highway 135, building remodel and addition. Mr. Bartlett, are you with us online?
No.
Okay. Well, let's just see what maybe Mark can help walk us through this.
Sure, so this is located off of State Route 135, just south of County Line Road. There's an old car wash that they're looking to remodel and redevelop. We're just asking that you accept the performance letter of credit from First Merchants Bank. It'll cover dirt work, storm sewer, erosion control, and science environment.
Questions for Mark on this?
I'll move for approval. Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Next, Alex Hertuck at Walter Haverfield for Redwood Apartments. Good evening. Come on up.
Good evening, folks. I am not Alex Hertuck, but I am Greg Thurman, VP of Acquisition for Redwood, in place of Alex tonight.
Okay.
And we're here to submit a corrected easement for sanitary sewer for our Redwood neighborhood over on Smoky Road.
We have a memo in front of this gentleman. Anything out of the ordinary on this, Mark?
No, other than
Is that a correct?
that correction that had to occur. It's been reviewed by engineering and legal staff, and everybody's satisfied with it.
Pleasure of the board.
I move that we approve the request. Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Pretty easy. Thank you. Next, Karen Collins, talk about the Madison. Karen, are you with us online?
I am.
Good evening, good afternoon, excuse me. Tell us what we're doing here.
Sure. I'm Karen Collins with A&F Engineering and bringing before you the Madison subplats of Block C and Block D. So previously we had Block C and Block D, and we did not define each one of the lots for the townhomes. So these subplats are coming back through and carving out those townhomes. So each townhome will have its own lot, and then the common area behind the townhomes that will be left as common area. So, and that's for both Block C and Block D at the corner of Serena and Meridian Street.
Sam, was this what you were talking about?
No, I'll do that. I'll do what I was talking about
Okay.
on that as a walk-on.
Okay, so Mark, yeah.
I think it is kind of combined with what you're talking about, but yeah, there are some conditions on the acceptance of these subplats, including the encroachment agreement that
Oh, okay.
needs to be
I'm sorry.
outlined. So we can handle it now or later, whatever you think is best, but
Let's do it now.
there's a portion of right of way along Meridian Street that was to be vacated and then brought into the new plat for the Madison townhomes, some of the other development out in Madison. Somewhere along the line, that right of way was never vacated, so it didn't reflect through to the Madison primary plat. The townhomes were constructed as approved, they're constructed per plan, but the porches or the stoops, whatever you want to call it, on the front end of those do encroach into our right of way. And one will be the front yards and the walks will be within city right of way. And so to keep the project moving forward and to keep the sales of these townhomes that have been lined up moving forward, we're asking the board to proceed with approving these subplats on the condition that the developer work with CDS and the city of Greenwood on encroachment agreements for the areas that do encroach into the public right of way. And then long-term, we will look to vacate that right of way and probably replat the site so that it all is one lot for each individual townhome, if that makes sense.
Questions for Mark on that? Sounds a little complicated, but you explained it pretty well. We have a vote motion in front of us. Whether you have any questions or issues?
I move that we approve the request. Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We can just come back on that. Okay. Next, Crossroad Engineers, Derek Snyder. Talk about Shiloh's Corner.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Right this side. Other side. See there.
Share that, so it'll look like quicker.
Good evening. So Derek Snyder with Crossroad Engineers, here on behalf of NJL, Stones Crossing LLC, request stormwater waivers for proposed commercial development known as Shiloh's Corner at 1464 West Stones Crossing Road. So property is located near 135 and Stones Crossing, more specifically the northeast corner of Galena Drive and Stones Crossing Road, immediately due south of the Barnum A. Morrison property. So the development, currently there's a single family residential home that will be demolished if it hasn't been demolished already. And pasture, and there's a couple existing structures, one of which is an existing barn, which will remain in place and be incorporated into the development. There's been a variance that was granted for that barn because it encroaches into a setback. The development itself will consist of 3 commercial lots, 2 of which are full service restaurants. Those are the 2 buildings on the far west side of the property, closest to Galena Drive, and then a multi-tenant retail on the southeast corner of the property. As you can see, we have our detention pond at the northeast corner. The existing barn, although not highlighted on here, is to the northeast of that building in the northwest corner. So that existing barn, the intent is that it will be, the facade will be dressed up, I believe, and they're going to incorporate it into the development on lot 1, which is a full service sit-down restaurant. So before you, we have 6 waiver requests, which I know is, not an inconsiderable amount. I will say that several of those are related to the existing barn and some of the topography issues with trying to maintain that and incorporate it. So a little background on what that would entail. The restaurant located on lot 1 will be owned and operated by Cunningham Restaurant Group. So they operate Brewburger, Stone Creek, Mesh, several others, a ton of different restaurants all over the state, some in Kentucky as well. So some really high-end, nice restaurants. The existing barn in question that kind of has necessitated the waiver request will be utilized for storage. So they're going to have raised garden beds for that restaurant, and they're going to grow their own produce and some vegetables, herbs, etc. that they're going to use in their restaurant. And they'll utilize the barn just for storage of garden equipment, tools, and such. So the 5 waiver requests that we have submitted, the first waiver request is for pipe cover, and this is actually related to the proposed storm sewer along Stones Crossing Road. So currently everything kind of drains east to west towards an existing ditch on Galena. So we have an existing storm sewer that we're tying into, installing some inlets in that roadside ditch and reworking to grade the ditch. So providing the 2-foot cover over those pipes as you work eastward and maintain our minimum pipe slopes we would actually have some spots where with that 2 foot of cover, our ditch would be above existing grade and above the road. Just because of topography, there's not enough fall to be able to construct that 18-inch storm sewer with 2 foot of cover to the point that we can still get the runoff from Stones Crossing Road into that ditch. We try to set that low enough so that that water can safely get in there and into that storm sewer.
Well, let's take each of these waiver requests individually. Mark, tell us your office's position on this.
The request to provide less than 2 feet of cover at the top of the storm sewer. The intent of that standard, of course, is to protect the storm sewer system, both from loading, so the car and truck drives over it, as well as from weather conditions, freezing, that sort of thing. As Derek mentioned, there's 2 locations. I think he discussed the one along Stones Crossing. There's also one in the northwest corner of the site. Is that correct? The sidewalk corner,
Oh, yeah, but the northwest corner, yeah.
which isn't on here, but it goes underneath the sidewalk. Staff is not opposed to the one in the northwest corner of the site. That's Stormline C. It'll be privately owned and maintained, and it's under a sidewalk, so it's probably not going to be subject to traffic loading. Stormline P, which is the one along Stones Crossing Road, based upon the information you provided, Derek, which is shown here on the screen, looked to me like the elevations could be met such that you could provide 2 feet of cover. It would just result in a fairly flat, grassy area along the roadside instead of a roadside ditch.
Yeah, so there would be, we would only end up with a couple inches of elevation difference from that stone shoulder on Stones Crossing into the ditch. So it would be very flat. Concern there is obviously just in heavier rainfalls, and as that gets built, just ensuring that that would have enough fall to get that water off the roadway. On the far east end, though, it would, that ditch grade would be above existing grade if we maintain that minimum height slope and then added the 2 foot of cover, which I think was structure 25. And then we actually have a portion, like 200 feet of paved side ditch that we're installing again because we have such flat elevations and minimal grade change to try to fit the storm sewer in.
Looking at the exhibit here in front of me, we have existing stone shoulder at structure 25 at 798.69 and the rim elevation at 798.42. So you have again minimal fall back to the structure. And I think we would be, well, my statement was if provided adequate roadside drainage can be provided, we would be opposed to a waiver of these requirements. So
C is okay.
yes, but Stormline
P,
if we can get adequate roadside drainage and provide the 2 feet of cover, that's what we'd like to see, even if it's a flat grassy
so
area.
your recommendation is deny a waiver request.
Yes,
Now,
provided.
Mark, if I may, if you look on the far right side of that sheet, so there's an existing grade at the property line, that's the 799.12. So our ditch grade, running that out of the, yeah, so that paved side ditch then would actually be above
the property lines.
Yeah. and actually above the snow shoulder as well, right there. So we had looked at, I had also looked at, what if we make it a 24-inch run and even flatter, which at that point now you're getting into some very, very flat slopes, and you just can't chase out that grade enough because now you've got the additional 6 inches of pipe diameter that you got to account for as well.
How close are you to the 2 foot cover?
I'd say they meet it in most places. There's one section, it's the high point in the roadside ditch. There's a break in the swale. You get closer to a foot of cover, I think that's what I remember.
Yeah, but half maybe at the inlets. And we wouldn't be opposed to even, I think, typically we would call out like a class 3 concrete pipe, which is, kind of your mid strength, so to speak. We wouldn't be opposed to making that like a class 4 or 5 and making it a higher strength concrete pipe to kind of ensure, that cover is not going to be an issue. This is not, obviously, because it's in a roadside swale, it's not subject to vehicular traffic where it's at. So it won't see vehicle traffic unless someone comes careening off the road, and then there's bigger issues for the buildings and the development in general.
Think about that.
You can pull that.
One at a time.
Yeah. And then Mark, we have our sheet probably, or depending on our motion, we may ask you to do the technical issues.
I think on waiver request one, I would move that we approve both requests. However, for line P, STMP, that pipe be upgraded to a class, what'd you say, 4 or 5?
Yeah, 4 and 5, either one of those would be stronger than what's typically specified.
Second that.
And Mark will, so we will check granted, and you're gonna add the conditions on that with respect to line P. Okay, further discussion on that? Bring that on, favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Sorry to walk you through these one at a time.
No, I understand it's a lot of information.
Do waiver two.
So this waiver is the SDSM stormwater standards require a 1/10 drop inside the structure, and then you match pipe grounds when you change pipe diameters. There is a provision in the SDSM that, show that your hydraulic grade line stays in the system, that avoid the matching of the pipe diameters. So in this instance, our storm sewer connection point is an existing 36-inch pipe along Galena Drive, and we're tying in at the same inver elevation of the 12-inch, and then extending our outlet from our pond at the minimum slope necessary. We do have we're specifying an inline check valve in the outlet from the pond, just to prevent any backflow from that storm sewer, because the 12-inch pipe is more or less at the invert elevation of 36. But essentially what we've done is we've submitted the HGL calculations that show that the system functions as intended, which is that it can pass the 10-year storm event and it stays below the rim elevations. In order to meet that specific requirement, we would end up having to raise the site depending on which location. At the pond, it would be, I think, a 3 or 4 inch raise as you work upstream in the storm system, specifically along Galena Drive. We'd be looking at needing to raise that 2.5 feet or so. The way we've designed the site is that so Galena Drive is private property. It's actually owned by Copper Chase Apartments. There's a cross-access easement, so the developer and the current property owner actually have egress rights along Galena Drive, but it is private property. So that's one of the commitments, or one of the requirements dictated by planning. We're actually installing a sidewalk along Galena Drive, but it will be on the developer's property. I don't know how familiar you are with that particular street, but there's several nice, large, mature evergreen trees that are on the adjoiner's property. So our goal is to tie in at the property line so that we can try to avoid removing those trees. We will have to take 1 or 2 out to put our driveway in. We're trying to maintain that. And so the site was basically designed that we were matching in existing grade with our sidewalk, and then our bead walks into our development are maxed out at 4.5%, which is about as much as we can go for ADA compliance. And as a result, that's how we kind of came to the balancing act of trying to keep the pond as low as possible, while also ensuring that we're tying in at our property line. And as a result, we have that. Don't have the 10th drop in the manholes, and our pipe cracks don't match. But as I mentioned, that's the calculations support that the the system would function as intended, and the STSM does allow for that if calculations indicate that they function.
Again, Mark, from reading the staff notes, this looks like it's a sort of two-pronged kind of.
Yeah, it's similar to the last one with the minimum pipe cover. Generally, we're not opposed to this. Again, the intent of the 0.1 foot drop through manholes is largely to make sure that water's flowing through it. We don't get an accumulation of debris and settlement that's gonna affect the performance of those pipes. Generally, we're not opposed to it when they're privately owned and maintained storm sewer lines, which the vast majority of pipes on this system are, because it won't be the city's issue to maintain long-term. Again, that section of pipes, stormwater line P is in the public right of way, and slope's an issue there, so I don't know if there's if you could provide that 0.1 foot drop and still get pipe slope and meet our minimum pipe velocities through the storm sewer system if you were to add the 0.1 foot drop to each manhole.
Yeah, so we have possibly, I would have to look at that. So I think we had the pipe cover issue kind of gets compounded because that was another, trying to provide as much pipe cover as we could with the constraints, and kind of the middle ground was to eliminate the 10th drop and design the pipe in that particular run so that we had a little bit of wiggle room in our capacity, so it's not completely maxed out.
So Mark, if I'm reading this correctly, you would recommend or satisfy as granting a waiver with respect to the pipe that's located in the private area, but would suggest we deny the request for the waiver of that, which is in public. Is that correct?
Yes, that's how my memo reads currently, and I'd be comfortable proceeding with that as long as the board understands that, again, to provide that 10 of a foot drop through that stormwater sewer pipe, we might sacrifice more on the cover that was approved in the previous waiver.
Well, I'll make that motion in that we grant the waiver request to the extent that the pipe is it's privately owned and maintained, and we will deny the request with respect to that pipe, which is in the public practice. Further discussion? Mark will leave this for you to just like it. Further discussion? Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, moving on to waiver request.
So on the exhibit that we submitted to staff for review, we kind of lumped two of the waivers in together because they deal with the same issue, but different sections of the stormwater standards. So
We do a 3 and 4. Which matches up.
yeah, let me check that here real quick. So that's 3 and 5. 3 and 5.
3 and 5.
So the ordinance requirements in question on this are that your building minimum lowest adjacent grade and your building minimum finished grade must be 2 feet above your pond, emergency spillway, and overflow. So for the proposed buildings, for the 2 full-service restaurants and the retail building, we have no issues with meeting that requirement. That's met. The issue that we run into is with the existing barn, which they intend to maintain as storage gardening equipment. So essentially, again, what we've done is we've tried to design the pond to be as low as possible to give us as much separation as we can. On the screen now, the purple box is the existing barn that will be remaining, or will be maintained, excuse me. So we have essentially designed the storm outlet from the pond at the minimum slope and set our pond as low as possible. In addition to that, emergency overflow, the spillway from the pond, we've got to provide positive fault, so it has to operate automatically and be at gravity. So it's been designed to ensure that if it were ever activated, which would require an excess of 100-year storm event, that it can flow via gravity through that bypass area. So with the way that the pond's been designed is, we actually have some additional storage above our, we have a 100-year elevation, and then we have, I believe it's 910, so we have almost a foot of additional storage from our 100-year to our spillway, before that spillway ever becomes activated. So in the event that it does, and the water would flow over that in say a 500-year storm, then essentially, there would be approximately 18 inches. The requirement is 24. So the building finished floor elevation is 18 inches, approximately 1.53 feet above that elevation, whereas the requirement is 24. As I mentioned, the existing barn is to be utilized primarily as storage. I know they have considered other uses in the future, but at this point, all the intent is for that to be used as garden equipment storage for their outdoor plant events.
Nothing with occupancy at this point.
I don't believe so. I think they've talked about considering that in the future, but I don't think that they have a plan to do that right now. I don't, in fact, as far as I know, there's no sewer service, there's no water service to it, and electrical. I think they may run one electric line to it just to be able to put a light in there so that they can see when they're moving things around if it's dark.
Mark, your suggestion on both of these is that the grant a waiver, but it'd be conditioned upon if there ever is a change in the use of the area that we revisit this. How would the revisiting of it come about?
So if they were going to use the building for occupancy, they'd have to get a building permit, obtain a certificate of occupancy, so we have a chance to review it at that time.
So essentially, they would not have a certificate of occupancy from that building specifically.
Right,
until
or
they're
use it at an event center or something else.
Yeah, so we're gonna do waiver number 3 and 5 at the same time, is that correct?
Yeah.
I would move that we approve waivers 3 and 5, subject to the condition of the staff report that outlines the certificate of occupancy or the change from storage to admit space if that occurs in the future, that this item be revisited.
I'll second that. Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay, go back to 4. okay?
So, and similar to the maximum height grounds.
4 and 6 now.
What's that?
We did 4 and 6. for the-
No, just
Just 4 and 6.
So, similar to the other waiver that I mentioned, that the STSN does allow for, in this instance, when you have a vegetated swale of at least 1%, the STSN does allow for the swale to be constructed without undergrade, with the exception of the emergency overflow from the pond, which is less than 1% of will to perforated undergrade. All of our swales are at least 1%. So we're asking for a waiver from the requirement that they include an undergrade due to topographical constraints. On the west side of the property along Galena, there is an existing swale there now. We're going to regrade it a little bit because with the addition of the drive, a small portion of the water that was draining south needs to go north now. So we're just regrading the ditch a little bit to ensure it drains properly. There's actually an existing gas main right down the middle of that existing ditch. So installing a perforated underdrain in the center of that ditch would result in a utility conflict. And again, with the number of mature existing trees on the adjoiner's property, we're trying to limit how many utilities, how many impacts that are realized in that specific area. The storm sewer along Stones Crossing is also included in that request, and that is more related to the depth of that storm sewer. As we went through on the initial waiver request, that storm sewer is relatively shallow. Our ditch, our swale runs down the middle of that storm sewer because due to the topography, we basically have to pipe that entire side ditch along Stones Crossing to be able to get it to drain. And so, because it's all piped, we're requesting a waiver to eliminate the underdrain. We are meeting the 1% slope. The underdrain we wouldn't be able to build it in the center of the ditch because of the 18-inch concrete pipe that we're using. That's roughly 1.5 to 2 feet of cover through there.
Mark, staff's position on this.
So staff would be opposed to this waiver. Our standards in our Greenway Stormwater Technical Standards Manual does provide that the commissioner can provide a paved concrete swale if they are less than 1%, or in this case, less than 1.3%. The intent of this standard is to provide an additional drainage outlet for relatively flat swales. Water can just sit in there. It'll pond, it'll grow cattails, it'll be hard to mow. So a paved concrete swale prevents that.
Eric, your thoughts on that?
So, I'm sorry, staff's recommendation would be a paved side ditch.
Paved in
In lieu,
Yeah.
could we, in lieu of the paved side ditch, because our center, we've got inlets, so the center line of our ditch is following basically the alignment of those structures in that storm run. In lieu of a paved side ditch, could we do just an offset underdrain? To provide the underdrain, but to basically offset it from the center line, and that it build it the same way, but not have it in the center.
I'd be comfortable with that if it connects to the storm sewer system.
Yeah, I think we could do that. We would offset it a couple feet instead of putting it right down the center.
So it would be directly under the low point of the swale, but the water would still get to it.
And I would, given that information, I would move that we would grant waiver 4.
With that, I'm sorry, just to interject, so and that would be for the Stones Crossing. Would that apply to Galena as well?
Which two would you like it to apply to?
Preferably not Galena because of the gas main.
So we're
Trying to avoid putting the underdrain in the gas, in conflict with the gas main.
So you'll be regrading the ditch in Galena, that you put a paved invert along Galena.
We would prefer to avoid, I could look at potentially rate, if we get to 1.3% what's the cutoff to avoid any kind of?
1.3%.
1.3.
Yeah, well, it's 1%, and then between 1 and 1.3, there's this discussion to waive it. But yeah, if you get about 1.3, I think you can waive it.
So we could have,
Chris, or is it 1.5?
Yeah, I think so.
1.3.
so if we get to 1.3, the underdrain and the paved side ditch would be required.
Yes.
Okay. I think just to avoid any utility conflicts and relocations, I would find a way to regrade that ditch and make it work. To avoid the underdrain and the paved side ditch. So I would probably actually withdraw the request for that specific portion, and we would just revise that for that area. I think we could probably make the 1.3 work.
So you're withdrawing waiver 4?
I would
Yes,
say,
I guess so.
Yeah, stay on both of them, they would be if they're providing an offset underdrain in the other one.
Yeah, so we would withdraw that request. I think we can make those work.
Let the record reflect that waiver request number 4 was withdrawn. We'll go on to still have waiver request number 6.
Yeah, last one, I promise. So the final waiver request 6, is related to the depth of the wet pond. So by ordinance, the minimum normal pool area for a wet pond is half an acre. The ordinance requires that we provide a 10-foot safety ledge below that normal pool. In the event a vehicle finds its way in there that shouldn't, prevent that vehicle from going down deeper into the 8 or 10-foot depth of the pool. In addition to that half acre normal pool minimum, the ordinance also requires that you provide 10-foot depth, and it's got to cover at least 50% of the normal pool area. So in this case, it would be a quarter acre. Because of the shape and small size of the pond, that 10-foot depth can't be maintained for 50%. We can maintain it for, I think it's 23%. And that is, like I said, mostly a function of just a half acre normal pool with a 10-foot safety ledge. Start to get into your space, and you can provide that 10-foot depth even with a 2-to-1 slope below the safety ledge. So our slopes to, if we had to maintain 10 feet, we would be looking at steeper than 1-1 below the safety ledge. Pond will have an aeration system, so water quality shouldn't be an issue. Water quality, the best management practice, they'll have to be recorded, signed by developer, signed by the mayor, and then recorded with the property. Includes the pond aeration system that will keep that pond from being stagnated and turn over the normal pool.
So as Derek noted, this requirement is really, it's arguably more for water quality than anything. A shallow pool, you get sunlight in the bottom, you're gonna get algae growth, you're gonna get plants, you're gonna not be able to support aquatic life. The other option that Derek did not touch on is the pond could be made wider at the expense of the density of the development. So they would have to sacrifice parking, which in turn would probably mean they'd have to sacrifice some of the building size or buildings, but the pool could be made wider, and then you could get a deeper depth without a steeper slope that he's indicated he's worried about. Again, he did mention there'd be an aeration system, and Chris and his team would be the one that would have to chase that and maintain that long term. So he's the one to be getting the calls about the water quality. So
we wouldn't maintain it, we could just check that they maintain
at the record.
You get the complaints.
it initially.
I know we've waived this requirement in the past for different developments.
Yeah, and I will say that we looked at different configurations, making it a square essentially, so it's equal on all sides, and even at a half acre with a 10-foot safety ledge, that half acre normal pool, which is that's the STSM minimum, is half acre. So for development of this size, which is relatively small, it is dense, but it's small. Half acre normal pool works meets the stormwater release rate standards. And doesn't have exceptionally deep storage volumes. I think we're only storing maybe 3 feet of water under your storm. It's not like this thing's 10 feet deep. So regardless of the shape, that half acre normal pool does not allow for 10-foot, 50% of safety ledge.
Are there any accommodations you could make that's going to be closer to the requirements there? From 50 to 23%.
What about, assume there'll be guardrails along that
Probably not that.
parking lot?
No, so we only require guardrails where it fronts public right of way or even a private street. Not
I
necessarily
thought if they
park.
put one there, they could maybe they could make the pond deeper. Maybe do away with some of the safety slope.
I wouldn't eliminate the safety ledge. I know that's
Yeah, in addition to vehicles, that's also too, if someone falls in the pond or goes swimming in the pond, it's
Got an
shallow
apartment
enough they can
complex that's
stand
nearby,
up and
kids
walk
everywhere.
out of the pond. Yeah.
Yeah, I would want to do that. I think since he's gonna aerate the pond with fountains, that takes care of that water quality issue, I think. Just need to make sure that we.
The condition of the.
Right, I would move that we approve waiver 6 with that condition.
Give it a second, further discussion?
is that just with the standard aeration, or is it?
Yeah, so our standards already require aeration to an extent. Well, it does require aeration, so I don't even know if you have to qualify it on that because they are required to provide it for water quality. I don't know if there's something additional they provide for additional water quality that the stormwater department might want to see, or that petitioner could offer up, but it will include aeration regardless.
Yeah, We like to see if you tried to do something native along the edge, help keep out the waterfowl. Something to that effect, or, I mean, even the fountains are a nuisance to the geese, and that's what is the nuisance.
So either option would be. Is that what I'm hearing, is either a fountain or native?
No, I think the fountain has to be.
Yeah.
Well, the
Aeration
fountain,
has to.
yeah, so the fountain's not required, it just has to be aerated, so it may be aerated, but you won't see it necessarily.
You're talking about, yeah,
Put a bubble
It's
in.
just,
Bubbler.
yeah, bubbler, essentially is what we, and actually, I think the developer, they initially thought they would do a fountain, I think they changed their mind because the noise, they do have some outdoor seating out there, and they don't want it to be,
therapeutic.
screaming over the person sitting next to you potentially. But if I could present them with two options of, a fountain or native plantings,
Yeah.
I can let them decide.
But still, of course, they reach just require not necessarily. Okay. Further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Anyone from the audience wish to address us? Sam, will go to IDM compliance plan status update.
We hope to be completed with the IDM compliance plan at the end of this month, and we retain an engineering firm to attempt to get it terminated.
Thank you. Your status of task?
First up, I'd like to do a walk-on, please. Sure. The police department wants to rid itself of a whole bunch of abandoned bicycles to a not-for-profit, Pedals for Joy, that refurbishes them and gives them to needy families.
I move that we approve the request.
Second.
This is for the signature by the deputy mayor. Further discussion? Hearing all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Next up is resolution 2309.
Yeah.
This is,
And we see that religion is this,
Uh,
that agreement.
Terry already has the original.
all I have is the item list. You want the-
No, I got that.
Okay, I don't have
Oh, so-
Next up is resolution 2309. This is a resolution in response to the situation we had last meeting where we had a bank that made a material change to our bonds. I think that we discussed whether or not we wanted to have a policy, so we weren't put in the position again where somebody was all the way down the road with the bank that wasn't going to work with our parameters.
And you prepared a sort of template for us to use, the city to use.
We have our own template bond. This is just a resolution that says if you, we will not accept bonds that materially differ from our template.
I'd make a motion to approve resolution 2309.
I'll second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
That's all I have.
Thanks, Sam. Mark?
Yes, the first item I have in front of you tonight is, actually, this item is shown incorrectly on the agenda. It's actually an administrative settlement for parcel 1 at Smith Valley Road, Averett Road. This is the parcel in the southwest corner of the intersection. It's the Fifth Third Bank. They're doing business as Barbersville State Bank. We made an offer to them of $33,800. They came back requesting some additional money. They were looking to be compensated for the loss of their third driveway. We talked them down to an additional $8,100. So because it's above the fair market value that our appraisal came back at, we have to seek an administrative settlement, which means we think it's worthwhile to pay this additional $8,100 versus going to condemnation and trying to take the property.
And amount of 41,900.
The total amount for this parcel would be $41,900. So if we approve this administrative settlement, I'm asking that you authorize the mayor to sign it on the board's behalf. We'll present the offer to the bank, and then I'll be back before you with the formal offer for payment to accept the permit right away.
So moved.
I'll say.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
The next item we have for you is the Bexley Village Apartments. We're asking you to authorize the mayor or deputy mayor to sign on the board's behalf the operations and maintenance manual for this development.
So is this, how does this relate to, they came in last year?
Yes. So we've been chasing them on some bank stabilization issues on their pond. They've come through our site development process. They've proposed a solution. I believe it's just riprap, appropriately sized riprap along the perimeter of the pond. So they'll
Is there a different owner in there now? Is that part of
It's the
it?
same, development corporation. They changed, it did change, I think, in the middle of the process while we were trying to pursue them to correct it. It did change in the last couple of years, but, the most recent owner we've worked with for probably since I was in the city, so over a year now. And they've been slow, but they've been good to work with.
So it's more than one pond though, right?
It's all ponds,
Yeah.
yes.
Well,
And hopefully this operations and maintenance manual, we can prevent this from happening in the future. It'll be another tool for us to make sure they maintain.
so you think that the erosion was caused due to lack of maintenance?
I think that fed into it. I think probably the way the ponds were constructed, I think the way the stormwater sheet flowed, I think there was a number of contributing issues. But if the original management company might have gotten out ahead of it, tried to correct it, fix it, instead of letting it go, I don't think it would have gotten to the state it would have, that it did get to.
And are we gonna run into this situation with other ponds or developments?
We could, yeah, I wouldn't say it's impossible.
You want to have them take care of.
Yeah.
Some of that pond is so close to
Yeah.
those buildings.
Yeah, I think that was a large part of the issue there. Is
Rip
the-
rap's gonna have a hard time sticking.
They should be using large enough size rip wrap, redundant size rip wrap, but not the, 1-2 inch. We're talking big stuff.
This is the O&M, right? We're-
I would move we approve the O&M manual, authorize the mayor or deputy mayor to sign.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Final item I have for you, we had this at the meeting, our last meeting. You authorized us to begin drawing down, the process to draw down a letter of credit for the Twin Peaks restaurant development at the Greenwood Park Mall. We have since heard back from the developer and who holds the letter of credit. They have offered to extend the letter of credit through, what's the date on that? February 18th, 2024 with an auto renew clause. So it's at the discretion of the board if you would like to continue the process to draw down the letter of credit. If you don't think they'll make these improvements in time, or we don't think they'll continue to work with us, we can continue that drawdown process so we can do those improvements ourselves. Or we can accept their offer to renew and extend.
The process is at the point where the bank was prepared to cut a check today, and they delayed that till tomorrow to give you time to say whether or not you wanted a bond. What do you want the 18,000? We would be responsible for the sidewalk, I would say.
Right, the sidewalk, and there's some issues on the site closeout, like as-built and stuff we have to finish ourselves.
So is it probably not working on that?
They have it since they've opened it.
What do you think is best?
Do you have any confidence or encouragement that they are going to do it? Extend this?
Could we pull the certificate of occupancy, or do they have a temporary certificate of occupancy?
They have a permit certificate of occupancy. I don't know that we could pull a certificate of occupancy over this issue.
How'd they get that if they didn't have the sidewalks?
So on a commercial development, we allow them to post a performance guarantee, like a letter of credit to finish out these items. That's how we get that C of O, so that we can pull the performance guarantee and finish it ourselves if they don't come back and finish it.
What do you think we should do?
So the bank is saying they're gonna provide check or another letter?
So.
They'll do another letter or a check. It's our choice.
So they could cut us a check and we would have to take it, complete the work ourselves, which would at a minimum involve procuring the materials and having the street department doing it. At a maximum, depending on the size of the work, the amount of the work, it might not be something our street department would be comfortable doing or have the capacity to do, in which case, if it's above a certain threshold, we'd have to bid the work out. And that's the concern with drawing down a letter of credit is there enough money to do this work? So I would probably recommend that we continue to work with the developer at least through the next auto renew cycle and see where they're at in February.
I agree.
Any action from us on that?
We would ask that you would,
Extension.
yeah, provide staff to accept the extension.
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Probably should go take a look at it ourselves.
Be sure to get your picture taken.
Yes.
Okay, Greg.
Nothing for me.
All right.
I would move that we accept the claims as presented.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you all. Adjourn at 6:21 PM.